Hey, what's happening, Spider Friends? Welcome back to Marvel's Spider-Man here on the K-Wings Let's Plays channel, and it's time for some spider lore on Spider-Man Noir, also known as the Spider-Man from basically the World War II era, who made his first appearance in Spider-Man Noir #1, February of 2009. So this is a Spider-Man that comes from a very bleak, alternate world of World War II, and he lost his uncle to not just like a crazed gunman, but like it was kind of like a mob hit, and a really gruesome one which I really don't want to discuss. Now this Spider-Man also uses a lethal force, or at least did, before getting chewed out by Aunt May after saving her from the Vulture, who was the man responsible for killing Uncle Ben, and also later love interest Mary Jane, who works at the same shelter as Aunt May, helping people during the Great Depression, also mentions something to the Spider-Man, as he's known, or the Spider in different incarnations, that killing is not very good, and he needs to be above people like the Goblin and the Crime Master, who are villains in the Spider-Man Noir world. Another interesting thing to note about this character is how he got his powers. A little bit different than some of the other Spider-Men, but it basically happened... Yeah, well, hopefully they'll help with that, Spidey. It pretty much happened when Spider-Man, or rather Peter, was being an investigative reporter, I guess you could say, working for a guy named Ben Urch, who is the kind of boyfriend of Felica Hardy, which in this universe, she is like a nightclub owner, kind of like a classy female fatale. Think of her kind of like, oh, what was Blanks from Dick Tracy, I think would be a good comparison for her character. So, pretty much, he is working for this reporter guy who kind of takes him under his wing after Uncle Ben is killed by the mob, and Peter becomes this kind of sidekick to this famous reporter in New York City during, you know, the World War II era. Unfortunately, this reporter friend of Peter's is eventually killed, and Peter tries to get revenge against the Goblin mob by shadowing them to this factory. And while he's there, this container of spiders is released from this spider statue, and that's how Spider-Man gets his powers. But it's not the same powers as, you know, 616 Spidey. He's a little bit weaker in terms of that, and also his powers are kind of like a curse. They're not something that you would really want. Rather than being killed, along with some of the other mob enforcers when this container opens up, Noir Spidey is cursed by this spider deity, which is not that one guy from Africa. This is somebody completely different, and he is telling Peter that his powers are not a curse. And another contrast to the Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. That saying is never around in this universe. In fact, Spider-Man, like I said, he literally would kill people with guns or other things, and eventually over time he would kind of stop doing that, just because he didn't want to be like the mob enforcers that he was hunting. Which, you know, interesting thing. And now we're inside of this factory, which is kind of how a lot of Noir stories happened. They were inside of, like, shady dealings and, you know, very 40s-esque places, 30s. So I figured this would be a good setting to continue talking about Spider-Man Noir. So you guys know how he got all his powers and stuff like that. And we're just going to trip these guys up very carefully so we can get the achievement. Right there ought to do it. And before I forget, I do have the power called the Sound of Silence, which is supposed to help with stealth, but I'm not really good at utilizing it. It's supposed to make people not be able to see you and stuff like that, but it doesn't really go all that well for me. So we'll just have to make do with what it is. So after Spider-Man gets his powers from, you know, the horde of spiders by that spider deity guy, he begins to kind of take down the mob, like, from different informants. One of those informants is actually Felica Hardy, who is known as the Cat, and she wants revenge for the death of her boyfriend, the famous investigative reporter of the Daily Bugle. And she kind of, at one point, suspected J. Jonah Jameson. In fact, she shows up at his office and shoots him in cold blood. But then it turns out that JJ wasn't the real J. Jonah Jameson, it was a chameleon, which is another Spider-Man villain. So, yeah, this world is very, I would say kind of like Batman-esque, except more so. There's a lot of mob people that end up getting axed by either the Spider-Man, Felica Hardy, or just run-ins with the police, you know, which is what happened to mobsters back during that era anyway. I know, Zelda, the air conditioner is kind of hard to deal with, so we'll do our best. She doesn't like the loud noises. So, just little background if you guys need to know. Our air conditioner broke, and the complex was nice enough to give us a new AC unit for the wall, temporarily. Alright, so back to the spider lore. So, the Spider-Man costume is actually Ben Parker's World War I costume, except all black. And Peter wears it as a way of honoring his uncle. Also, he saw his uncle as like a huge hero in his life.
That location is a clearinghouse for donations to Lee's charities. Clothes, books. They're trucked in from drop boxes all over town.
Sounds like a perfect distribution network for drug running, which it looks like is their real priority.
So, okay, so pretty much after Felicia took out the chameleon and was kind of infatuated with the spider, but also blames him for the death of her boyfriend, they have kind of like an interesting relationship. It's kind of like the playful teasing banter, except, you know, I really believe that in this universe, instead of Mary Jane, Peter's main squeeze that he really wants is Felica Hardy. And Felicia really, I don't know, I guess she's kind of like an older woman in this universe, and she kind of likes Peter for a while, but not really. She just sees him as kind of like the replacement to her former boyfriend who was killed by the mob, and at the same time, she wants him to use his powers to, you know, help people, because he's been given this great stuff. She never says anything about responsibility. She just kind of uses the kid as a tool to take down people like the Goblin. And eventually, he does defeat the Goblin, but the first person that he has to take out is the Vulture, who is targeting his aunt. And the reason why he's going after her is because she's making a lot of problems for the Enforcers, which are the Goblin's men. And one thing that they don't talk about in the comic books, if you remember from Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, is Noir Spidey, they really go into both Hammerhead and the Vulture character. And the Vulture character in Spider-Man Noir is really kind of like a Dr. Jekyll serial killer type guy. He is a terrifying individual. And he targets Aunt May after butchering, you know, Uncle Ben.
MJ, I've got the place locked down.
Great. I'll call in an anonymous tip. I bet if the police check out those drop boxes, they'll find something more interesting than secondhand jeans.
While searching for the missing J. Jonah Jameson, who's kidnapped, Peter Parker gets a lead on where Jameson is being held, and he manages to kill the Vulture, which he gets chastised by Ben's widow, May, who tells the Spider-Man that he shouldn't be killing people. And that's where he kind of, like, puts that to heart a little bit, but he still goes after the Goblin, takes him down, and he also found out that Felica Hardy was kidnapped, and, you know, he goes and he saves her and stuff like that. And he learns that Felicia was responsible for killing the chameleon, and he was kind of like, you know, I don't think that your former boyfriend, you know, past tense, would have really appreciated you doing that. But she kind of does her own thing and still manages to be, like, kind of this mob enforcer helping out Spider-Man. Think of her like an Oracle type person. So months after the Goblin's demise, pretty much, there's a new bad guy that comes into town called the Crime Master. And Peter is really trying to heat up his relationship with Felica Hardy then. And things are kind of going well, except the criminal empire finds out that Felica and Spider-Man are kind of a thing, which they sort of are. It gets a little confusing, but also at the Daily Bugle, Peter, who's doing really well, he basically works with a guy, Robbie Robertson, which you guys know from the Daily Bugle and stuff like that. And a lot of things are going well in Peter's life. He's kind of got a girlfriend, and crime is getting low. The war effort is going well for the US, all that fun stuff. But the Crime Master and the Sandman are really causing problems. So Felica gets the FBI involved, which I don't remember the name of the person in the FBI. But eventually, Felicia's snooping around causes her to get in big trouble with the Crime Master, who, for a while, Peter thinks that Felica is actually killed by the Crime Master, but he did something really terrible to Felica, and that is basically disfiguring her face to the point where she has to wear a mask and goes by the name Black Cat, and kind of becomes like more than just an informant. I would say she's kind of like an anti-hero, and she really hates the Crime Master, but it was kind of her own fault too, because she was working with the FBI and kind of dated this new crime boss, and you know, dating crime bosses never really goes well for people, so Felica was horribly scarred by that. And then Peter did eventually take down this Crime Master. He has a big role in the Spider-Verse, working with the Superior Spider-Man for a long time, and helping out a lot of the different spider people. But eventually he gets wounded, and I believe he's taken back to his world by Silk and Spider-Woman, which Peter Parker from 616 World is kind of like, wait a second, that's not a good idea. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on. The different vampire people will find you and destroy you. What's sweet about Noir Spidey being back home, though, is Felica is actually kind of nursing him back to health, and that's kind of the last we really see of him. In the Ultimate Spider-Man universe, you know, there's some stuff that happens, and it's hinted that Mary Jane and Peter become a couple, and Felicia just kind of is a mob boss now or something. And then they take this further in the last Spider-Man cartoon show, where Mary Jane is a reporter, and the Spider-Man is known as the Spider, and he works with his Ultimate Spider-Man counterpart. And for the longest time, it's hinted that Mary Jane and Spider-Man are kind of a thing. But unfortunately, in the third appearance of the character, you find out that Mary Jane was killed by the Hammerhead when a building was destroyed, and she rushed in to help people, because I believe Aunt May was inside and some other stuff. Also, Spider-Man's costume, too, he is known for wearing a fedora and trench coat, and he will appear in the upcoming Spider-Verse movie, voiced by Nicolas Cage. And I thought about doing a Bogey impression, because that's the voice that we're going to hear for the character. But anyway, in the comment section below, tell me what Spider lore you would like to hear next time. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch, Spider Friends. Until we meet again, God bless and happy gaming. Thanks for watching.